Hello and welcome to Blockchain Gaming World episode 197. I'm your host John Jordan. Don't forget to check out my daily email about blockchain gaming. You can find that at gamestx.substack.com. In today's episode, I'm talking to Luke Barbakowski, who's the CEO at Pixels. Third time on the show for Luke. Always pleased to talk to him, as he is one of the deeper thinkers in the blockchain gaming space, also I believe. And indeed, in this episode, we are talking about how he is trying to deal with sort of the current situation for all blockchain games, and particularly for Pixels, which at one point was the most popular blockchain game with over 1 million daily active unique wallets. During the last year, that has dropped right down, and the token price, the Pixels token, Pixel, has dropped down as well in price over 90%. So we've sort of seen what sort of outwardly looked like a great success story becoming what looks like a disaster. Of course, it's not a disaster. And as we talk, Luke has been quite forthright, really, in his process and thinking around what he's trying to do, which is get return on the rewards given. So Pixels gives out a lot of Pixel rewards, and what the team are trying to do is work out what people do with those rewards. So obviously, a lot of people just sell them off. And the point being, make it harder for those people to get rewards, and make it give more rewards to people who are taking the Pixel token and spending it in the ecosystem, and actually maybe spending more to get sort of further in the game. So this is a sort of a situation that all blockchain games are really dealing with. I think Pixels is at the forefront of doing that. In particular, we talk about the announcement that Pixels has adopted the Apptoken standard. I mean, I've spoken a lot about Apptokens in the last few months. I think we're going to be talking a lot more about it in 2025. And that's just a way of giving developers control over what players can do with tokens. So in particular, we talk about the new vPIXEL token that Pixels is introducing, and how that can only be spent or staked. And that plays into a wider ecosystem play, which is other games using the Pixel token or this new vPIXEL token. So plenty to talk about and plenty to digest in the episode. I really enjoyed it. I hope you do too. Don't forget to subscribe. Every episode we are talking to the people who are sticking with blockchain gaming and trying to overcome the challenges, and who still believe in the vision of what we're trying to do. So don't miss out, do subscribe, but on with the show. Hello everyone, very pleased I have Luke from Pixels back on the show for the third time. How's it going, Luke?
Good, thanks for having me.
We've just been I've been looking at his hat and thinking his hat's cooler than mine. Although my hat's very cool. We can talk about Apptokens, but I think you wear your hat better than I do with mine. So a bit sort of preamble. Like, you came on sort of twice last year, and that was sort of the stages where Pixels had just gone to Ronin, was doing tremendously well, and sort of everything was up and to the right, as we like to see. And since then, that's not quite been the case. So just in a broad scheme of things, just over since we last spoke, how have you sort of felt being the sort of the CEO of a company where market forces have moved against you, and you've had some product sort of choices to do as well? I'm sure that's sort of never fun, but you seems to a little bit be like water off a duck's back to you. You seem not to be very affected, but is that so how have you found it?
How I view this is basically a good market is obviously great. Everybody wants that. And a good market can hide mistakes that the company is making as well too. So it doesn't mean that the company is executing perfectly. Just because there's a good market and there's some things going up and to the right, this is actually a danger of building in Web3. Because sometimes things have been going well, and it's not completely because of what you're doing. It's because of these external forces too. And you're not really figuring out some of the important flaws of your business when you need to be. And a bad market, basically, I still have the opinion that great companies and amazing companies can move counter to markets, like Pixels did in the bear market last time, right? Pixels came from nothing and performed counter to the market basically the entire time. And now, we're probably trending with the market, which basically means that some of the flaws of our thesis in the original version, maybe we're wrong, and they're kind of getting exposed in certain aspects too. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because Web3 gaming is early, and what we need to be doing is we need to be figuring out what these issues are to actually solve the fundamental issue of how to make Web3 games work, right? Yeah. So some of the stuff that we were doing was directionally correct. I still stand by that. But then we kind of figured that we needed to actually add in new mechanics that actually fix some of the fundamental issues of Web3 gaming, right? So we have a much better picture now of how to make Web3 games work, because we do know the things that have been working. Like, there are very clearly things that have been working well for Pixels historically and have been insane competitive advantages against Web2 games. Like, you can't deny what Axie Infinity, Pixels, and some of the Web3 games that have become a bit more mainstream have done. But at the same time, there's still a lot of work to do to actually make them, sustainable and stay in the game for the long run too. And I think the other thing that people who are in Web3 hyper focus on is, it's funny because people get very narrow-minded in the evaluation of Web3 games. There's actually a ton of issues going on in the Web2 gaming industry too, so it's compiling on top of that as well. You know, some of the issues that Web3 games are facing are not just Web3 gaming issues, they're gaming issues in general. UA is getting more expensive, more games are flopping in Web2. You know, it's harder to build out a sustainable Web2 game. The Web2 gaming companies are kind of starting to consolidate. There's less new entrants coming in. And Web3 games face these same issues. And, you know, kind of what we're supposed to be doing in Web3 here is figuring out these Web2 gaming issues and helping them come up with new UA platforms, new UA strategies, all of this. So, yeah, at the end of this, I think, regardless of where this market is at, we're going to come out with something stronger and better. And, you know, a lot of what we're thinking about right now, too, is, you know, these same issues, again, are issues that Web2 gaming companies are facing. Can we actually be building things that fix Web2 games as well as we're building this?
Mm-hmm. And I guess partly my framing of the question was sort of falling into that trap of, you know, assuming things are going well because everything's going up and to the right. And so if things are going down and to the left, then down and to the right, I suppose, that must mean that the sort of, too often that's the lens in which we view, is a Web3 game doing well? Well, is the DAUs or wallets going up, and is the token going up? And those are sort of two things which you do have control over to some degree, maybe not so much on the token side. But in fact, the interesting sort of trajectory I think for Pixels is you've made a lot of choices in that product that you know are going to, or you made choices in the past that you knew were going to dump your daily activity at least. And you presumably you made those choices because you felt this is optimizing what we think our fundamental product is. It doesn't really matter what these perhaps vanity metrics are. You know, we need to sort of make these changes to our product. It doesn't really, you know, how many wallets we have a day don't really matter. And in fact, having 1 million wallets a day was nice, but clearly there was a lot of just extractive bots, whatever. They weren't good for the long term. You know, trajectory of our product.
Yeah, so I can go over that a little bit, right? A lot of the work that we're doing is evaluating like what the actual like key metric is that moves the needle for the goals that we have, right? And what's the goal that we have, right? We want to build a fundamentally sound ecosystem, and we want to help the Pixel ecosystem become as healthy as possible, which means like spend is very important in this ecosystem. Net revenue for the ecosystem is something that we're looking at quite heavily. And DAU is a secondary metric that can help that, right? But it's not the primary metric. So a lot of what we're talking about lately is quality DAU and actually building out towards net revenue, right? When we think about the fundamentals of a token ecosystem, that's an even more important thing when you think about inflows, outflows, all of this, right? And it's funny because one of the metrics that we've been known for over the last year has been daily active addresses, right? And it's funny because I actually have not been the one that's like promoting that metric. We just had high daily active addresses. Like the metric that I've been trying to talk about a lot for the last year, if you've been following us, is this idea of return on reward spend, right? And really the key metric that we're looking at is return on reward spend. It's more of a measure of net revenue. Are we able to use the token to grow the ecosystem in an efficient way that can basically compete against the traditional UA methods of like ad-driven user acquisition? And in order to do that, you know, we've had to change up our strategy a lot. One of the first and earliest thoughts was, okay, if we have high daily active addresses, we'll be able to convert a percent of those into paying users, kind of like the free-to-play model. And that still holds true, but that conversion rate was actually much lower than we were originally hypothesizing. How we kind of view like user activity inside of Web3 gaming, and Web3 in general too, is there's kind of like a spectrum of user quality, right? And on the like furthest to the left of this spectrum would be the bot and sidewall attacker, right? But then there does exist, you know, a little bit further on the spectrum, maybe like the airdrop farmer, for example, where it might be a real user, they might be multi-accounting like 10 accounts. They're still like real people, but their end goal is basically max extraction. And then, you know, when you go all the way to the right on like the ideal quality user, there's actually Web3 enthusiasts that just absolutely love Web3. They're like more than willing to like purchase assets just because they love it. They want to support ecosystems and all of that too. Now, a lot of the question mark that we've been having is like, okay, is there some value on like some of these users that are further to the left on the curve, right? Like these, for example, like real users that might be airdrop farming, and then like where do you start to draw the line on where they actually become beneficial to the ecosystem, right? This is a similar question that a lot of free-to-play games ask themselves too, right? Like this isn't unique to Web3, but it is unique to Web3 because I think the curve goes a bit further to the left when it comes to the user quality, right? Like Web2 games actually still struggle with bots. Look at any MMO, like RuneScape, World of Warcraft, EVE Online, like they spend a lot of time doing bot prevention detection because there's still currency farming in these games. Web3, the problem is probably 10x worse than any Web3 ecosystem. It's not just unique to gaming, but most of the user activity on chain is fake. Or not necessarily fake, but botted, right? And this goes across every single chain, ecosystem, all of this. There's just less users in Web3 than a lot of these Web3 companies actually want to say. And a lot of the metrics that these Web3 companies show off are probably not completely real. Really the best way to look at like real user activity in our minds is this concept of net spend per user. And even some of these other metrics like ARPDAU, like most of the gaming metrics actually are very good metrics to look at when it comes to the rest of the Web3 ecosystem, not just games, but like, you know, any consumer facing application, like the chains, the L2s, all this kind of stuff, right? And the reality is, and what we're starting to learn is basically you're never going to be able to convert some of these users into net paying users, right? You might get them to spend. You might be able to turn a bot or even these farmers into a spender, but they're never going to spend more than they put in, basically. So again, there's some other value that some of these participants might be producing into the ecosystem. And I think the way that we're starting to frame these users is we want to consider every user a contributor to the ecosystem, right? So not every contributor in any ecosystem needs to be spending money. There's actually a lot of contribution that users can do that helps create the ecosystem to be a bit stronger and might lead to other people spending money, right? So a great example that I like to provide is like, you know, if you were building a UGC platform, right? Having somebody like a Roblox, for example, paying somebody to go out and create maps in Roblox would be super valuable, right? That is great contribution to an ecosystem where somebody creating content in the ecosystem, but not spending money, you want that, right? And this is how we're kind of framing our play to earn mindset too, where if we have people earning inside of the game and ecosystem, we talk a lot about KPI shaping. So what we talk about is what are the metrics that we want to incentivize inside of the ecosystem? What are the things that might lead to higher net spend inside of the ecosystem? It's not always per player, but sometimes, you know, shaping like things like content creation in-game or even on social media platforms, referrals, growth-oriented metrics. That's super helpful too. Then there's other kinds of KPIs that, like, those are the KPIs that are more on the macro side, like how can I help build the ecosystem? There's also KPIs that you can do on the player side that we've been focused on too, that kind of help shape like individual metrics. Like, for example, we know when a user comes in and spends their first pixel sooner in their user journey, they're more likely to become a net spender. But yeah, basically, we're doing a lot of work to figure out like who the right users are to give incentives to. Our original thesis of like giving out too much to just boost DAU is not quite correct, right? And the quality DAU and basically converting users into net spenders or building out incentives that actually lead to higher quality users who will net spend is the important metric. And the interesting thing is you can kind of figure that out with lower DAU too. Like even if I only had 10 DAU, we could still go out and do this experimentation. It actually might even be easier with lower DAU. And then you can start scaling it with the right DAU better. So really our main focus is the ratio of pixel that we give out to the pixel coming in. It's much easier to do that with higher quality DAU than it is with this lower quality DAU in some aspects of the curve. Not to say that, you know, the users in our game don't matter or all of this too, but like some of the users in the game before we started churning some of them actually did not have the best intention of the ecosystem in mind too. And this is where, you know, the smart rewards matter, but then also some of the incentive mechanisms like Apptokens that we're working on help align that side of things too.
So let's do Apptokens as I'm wearing my hat. So I guess I'll try to give a sort of overall description, and then you can sort of dig into how you're thinking about it. So Apptokens is this sort of protocol from this company called Limit Break. It's called ERC 20C. They originally did a one for NFTs called ERC 721C, and that's been pretty sort of popular in terms of new NFTs, and that particularly came in to allow creators to enforce royalties on their NFT collections. That was a big issue when marketplaces like Blur came in, and people started to realise you couldn't enforce your 5% sort of reward that you wanted. And that's one of the reasons NFTs sort of went away so quickly. And now sort of Limit Break have taken some of the thinking around that with NFTs and now bringing it to the fungible token sort of situation. And as far as I understand it, there's lots of sort of moving parts to this. So it's a sort of a protocol and sort of a toolbox, and you don't have to use all of it. You can use sort of some of it. So some of the, I guess, more controversial things is you can set sort of the price of the upper and lower price of a token, so it can't go above or below this price, which would seem not very blockchain. You can sort of set the pairs it can trade against. You can sort of set it so you could have a token that people couldn't export to an external wallet or a centralized exchange and then sell it off. So you could have these idea of sort of marketing tokens that can only be spent in the game. So it's one of these things that I've tried to, in my limited technical ability, try to spend a bit of time thinking about and sort of see. Partly it's useful because nothing else has sort of worked very well. So for me, it's just whether you like it or not, it's a good experimentation. But for someone like you who's seen their token decline by 90% and seen some of the sort of issues with trying to, there are people who you could give money to who could spend it, but they're probably not going to, depending on market conditions. How did Apptokens? How did you was it a very obvious thing? You just go, yeah, I've been waiting for this, or was there a bit of a this doesn't seem very blockchain, should we use it sort of scenario going on there?
No, I wouldn't say it was very obvious at first. But it's obvious now. Yeah. So the limit break spec on Apptokens, if you go and read those documents, it's extremely complicated, to be completely honest. And there's a lot that's going to be unlocked with these specs in the long run, right? Our implementation is actually quite simple. And here's kind of the explanation of what we're thinking. So a lot of the work that Pixels has been doing is on the data science side. I'm very interested in reward attribution. So basically figuring out when I give a reward to a user, what do they do with it? Are they selling it? Are they using it in game? Are they, holding on to it? Like all these things really matter. And then the type of reward that I give out matters too. Like there's different types of rewards doing different things that are trying to achieve different goals, right? And that still is correct and like a necessary part of the stack. But how I view how to make a Web3 game great is I think there's three parts to it. Like the first being like the game needs to be good baseline. Has to be fun, enjoyable, and people need to be able to play the game for the love of the game without any of the incentives. The incentives are the thing that supercharges the growth and are the layer on top that make them competitive against Web 2 games. But if you don't have that fun aspect, none of this is going to work. The second part is this reward attribution is actually quite important. The stuff that we're doing with data science is a very necessary part of the stack. If you don't do that, you're going to give out all of your rewards to bots, all of your rewards to dumpers. You basically want to solve the problem from like the start of it. But then the third part too is you want to create systems that align the interest of the game and the players too. ERC 721C, the first like royalty enforced NFT collection, is a great example. And I'll dive into Apptokens after because I think this like NFT one makes a lot of sense for people. So there's an interesting conundrum with NFTs, kind of a paradox, right? Where a very high conviction user of an ecosystem might go and buy an NFT of an ecosystem, right? And without a royalty enforced, there's this weird misalignment between the game and the end user, right? Where this user might spend thousands of dollars on an in-game asset from purchasing it from another user. But the original seller of the NFT, the game, the one that did the primary sale, actually, if there's no royalties enforced, receives no revenue from that. And there's actually no incentive alignment between a secondary purchaser and the like original minter of the NFT for that reason, right? Like, why should the game care if a user spent thousands of dollars on an NFT if they don't get anything from that, right? You want people to want to support each other out of the goodness of their hearts, but that's not how it works for the player or for the game, right? So the ERC 720C, what it does is it enforces royalties. You can basically blacklist exchange or like NFT markets, all of this to make sure that royalties are enforced. And then that recreates alignment between the player and the game, because now on a secondary sale, the game actually is receiving revenue. And they probably are incentivized to go out and create like actual utility in game for these NFTs, right? Like to keep that NFT collection useful, all of this stuff. Now, you can think about it the same way with an ERC20C. Like basically what we're trying to figure out is how can you use different rules and different mechanics to actually keep alignment between player and the game as well too. And there's a lot more to dig into, because the rest of the ERC20C and the app token stuff can basically make it so you can do anything that you could in the Web2 game on chain. Like a team like Pirate Nation is going to love the app tokens, for example. But for us, we're still approaching it from this incentive question. So when we're giving out earnings to players inside of the game, this is where this matters a lot. One interesting thing that was happening is, we were doing a lot of data science with earnings. We were targeting earnings more towards users who like want to spend the token, all of that. There's only so many of those users that we can tap into though, right? There was still a large majority of our user base that would basically earn tokens, sell them immediately. And like basically hold zero token balance, right? And that's interesting because that actually is misalignment between game and user, right? Like our end goal is we want to give out tokens to people who are wanting to use them inside of a game and who actually want to stay in the ecosystem for the long term, right? And we actually lacked an ability to do anything about that after we gave them the earnings, right? They would just withdraw, sell them, and it actually hurts the people who love the game and the ecosystem. So what app tokens can do is we can basically introduce a concept now where we can reward the people who want to be using the token more, and basically, penalize, not penalize, because I think that's the wrong way to view it, but we can basically reward the people who want to use the token more. So a really easy example of how we're going to be implementing app tokens in the first stage is essentially we're going to be introducing a new companion token to the Pixel token. It'll be called vPIXEL. It'll be backed one-to-one with Pixel. And if you want to use vPIXEL inside of the game, or as if you want to use vPIXEL, basically, it's the same thing as Pixel. It's one-to-one with Pixel. Now, this token is unique because it's a spend and stake only token. So we're going to be giving vPIXEL out to people, and it won't be able to be traded on an exchange. It won't be able to be sold. It won't be able to be wrapped. Now, if people want to turn their vPIXEL into Pixel, they can either do it in-game and pay a fee, which will be distributed back to the people who are holding the token. Or, if they never want to sell it, they can still use it in-game like they normally would, right? So this combines with something that we're doing around staking, right? Essentially what we were trying to figure out is, the game mechanics, we were trending in the right direction. The smart rewards, we were trending in the right direction. Like the core token fundamentals are actually maybe a little flawed, right? Like the token rewards were a little too liquid. And this created misalignment. And there was also no reason to hold the token. So what we wanted to do basically is we wanted to basically preference people who are more likely to use the token, actually preference them through the tokenomics and the fundamentals of the token too. So if they wanted to hold the token or spend the token, they're not penalized. If they wanted to sell it, they pay a fee that's distributed back to the people who want to hold the token. And app tokens were basically the only way to do this on chain. And the app tokens made a ton of sense too, because we have more than one game in the Pixel ecosystem already, right? So some of the criticisms of app tokens are, you can do a lot of what they do off chain, and yes, that's true, but ERC20s and like actually the crypto framework makes a ton of sense when you have ecosystems of things, right? So say that we wanted to have a spend only in-game currency in our game, right? We actually do have that. It's called coins. It's an off-chain currency inside of the game right now, right? But if we wanted coins to be integrated inside of other games, that's a mess. That's a nightmare. We would have to build an API that you log into the Pixels game with, which we kind of have that. We would have to have the games that we want to use this in-game currency integrate this API. It would basically be like a native payments API that we have to go out and build. And then we have to do all the security around it, like do so much live ops. Like the security aspect of that is a nightmare, right? And then with Apptokens, actually there's already a payment standard in crypto across the board, right? ERC20C, you can do payments the same way in every single platform. Any partner that we want to work with in Web3 already has the tech to integrate ERC20 payments, right? There's actually a standardized framework for payments already. So app tokens are great because actually we can give people app tokens. Partner games can use them without any extra work. We don't have to build an API for payments that handles these off-chain mechanics, even though these are actually on-chain with app tokens. And we can build out systems that better align the game and the players too, right? So now we have a system where we can give out more rewards to players. If they're spend only, it's a win-win for player if they actually care about spending the token. If the player wants to liquidate the token and sell it on an exchange, then a fee is now paid. And that goes back to the players and the people in the ecosystem who have long-term conviction, and they can still use the token in partner games as well. It's a really simple, elegant solution. And yeah, it's really only possible with the app tokens if we want to make it work inside of the ecosystem. It would have been such a pain to do it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of going to be fascinating to see how different games, because I guess every game is sort of slightly different. It's obviously a very different product and it has slightly different views on how it would integrate this sort of thing. But you can see, as you've explained there's a very broad alignment, a sort of system that's broken at the moment that this seems to be fairly straightforward in fixing. Obviously, there's a consumer education thing that they've never really seen this in crypto. What are these things that I can't sort of sell? Are they proper crypto, whatever? But I think that can be overcome quite quickly. And then for me, it's hard to see. Obviously, you guys are, for whatever reason, are going first with it. And I think there's a few other people have said they're sort of looking at it. I think even Axie have sort of been spitballing around it. So it's hard for me to see that this doesn't become a standard quite quickly because. I mean, obviously it has to work, I suppose. If it just doesn't work, then people would just be like, well, they could just maybe say bad implementation from Pixels. But in general, you just can't think in a year's time that anyone would be launching without this stuff in there because it just gives you some levers to control your economy. And at the moment, if you don't control your economy just collapses and dies.
Yeah, so I know for a fact, I'm so confident that this thing that we're doing where you basically have a spend-only token or the liquid token, and then there's a fee to convert. I'm so positive this is going to be industry standard quite soon. This is one of those things that just makes a ton of sense. And like, why would you not do that?
You mentioned there the Pixels ecosystem, and I guess that's been going now. Where are we? I think end of last year we had Pixel Dungeons sort of kicking off. And now Forgotten Runiverse has announced they're using it. I don't know if it's sort of live yet, what stage they're in. But can you talk a little bit sort of generally? I mean, with Pixels Dungeons, I think that was quite an active thing that you were out looking for games to sort of integrate as a first step. How's that been going? And how? I mean, obviously Forgotten Runiverse is a totally separate game that's come to Ronin and then was going to launch its own token, I think, and then seems to have decided to use Pixels instead of launching its own token, which seems eminently sensible as well. So can you just talk about the differences between those two?
Yeah, so what we're doing with our staking system is actually really unique and cool. I'm very excited about it. It's kind of like a decentralized publishing model. And how it works basically is how our tokenomics were set up from the beginning is that there's 28 million pixel given out to the ecosystem every single month, right? And right now, Core Pixels takes most of it. And think about it from the ecosystem perspective. The ecosystem and the Pixel ecosystem's goal is to basically increase return on reward spend and build out sustainable play to earn, right? And why should it be that Core Pixels takes all of that pixel if there's maybe people that could be performing better than Core Pixels, right? So one of the things we started to experiment with is what happens when we give other teams the Pixel token as well? Are they able to also build out sustainable play to earn mechanics? And are they able to have even potentially better return on reward spend than Core Pixels? So how our staking system will work is when you go to stake Pixels in the staking system, you'll actually have to choose a game. You'll choose Core Pixels, you'll choose Pixel Dungeons, you'll choose Forgotten Runiverse, and a bunch of other games that are going to be joining as well too. And what that will do is the more pixel that is staked to a particular game, the more pixel that game is going to get to give out to incentivize their players to join the ecosystem. So essentially, players in our ecosystem will have a vote on where the actual ecosystem incentives go. And how this kind of ties in with the return on reward spend metric is these games will be able to go out and give rewards to their stakers, right? We hope that the rewards from these stakers are kind of generated from the in-game activity that they have, right, and matched. Now, these games have the option to give out whatever rewards that they want, right? But in order to be competitive, they'll need to basically give out competitive staking rewards, and that will help them get more pixel to give out to their users, right? So the higher return on reward spend that they have, the more in-game revenue that they're generating, the more potential that they'll have to give out rewards to their stakers to go out and acquire more users using the pixel token, right? And that's kind of the main idea. Basically, create a decentralized publishing system where more games can join in. Core Pixels has to be competitive against other games, and the tokens therefore kind of strengthen as a bet across the multiple games as well.
What point are you limited by how many games you can put in there? At some point, does it become just this massive log list and it just becomes sort of irrelevant? You have to sort of have this fairly tightly curated list?
So in the beginning stages, it'll be slightly curated, but I mean, how it works basically is if there's a ton of games in there, but like most of the games aren't returning any rewards to stakers, why would you stake to that game?
Yeah.
So there's some element of self-correction, right? There's edge cases that you might have abuse on, which we might. That's why we're going to stay curated for the first stages, and we'll kind of let games in one by one. But then, yeah, we want to open the floodgates eventually. Not even that long from now, basically. So the system becomes much better when return on reward spend is over 1, right? And that's kind of the end goal, where we want to curate the first couple of games to get there and help them get there, essentially. When return on reward spend is over 1, imagine that 28 million tokens go out as like user acquisition incentive, and then 30 or 40 million are returned to stakers. It starts to get quite interesting when we build out that model, and then you could even reinvest that back into more user acquisition. So if there was 30 million coming in to the ecosystem 1 month or 40 million coming into the ecosystem, maybe the ecosystem takes a 10% cut. We do 32 million in rewards the next month across games. That's kind of the idea. So we have to bootstrap that flywheel, right? Like there's still no game in Web3 that is consistently over 1 on return on reward spend month on month. When we start to get there and we help the initial games bootstrap to that, things get much more interesting.
Well, effectively, you've built like a perpetual motion machine, a profitable gaming ecosystem, in fact.
Yeah, that's the goal of every game company, right?
Okay. And presumably, do the games in the ecosystem have to be on Ronin? Because obviously that's where you are at the moment. But
we're working on multi-chain support for games. So, like we do want to publish games on other chains as well. So yeah, expect that because we love Ronin. Our staking system will probably stay on Ronin, but then we can also support other chains for this publishing system too. But core Pixels and like the part of the Pixels ecosystem is going to stay on Ronin. I don't love the idea of like writing the multiple chains, but yeah, we can go and publish games on other chains. That's no problem, and we have some stuff in the works there.
And I mean, I think this has been a trend that I've sort of noticed for a while. Obviously, Pixels is what you're known for, and that was sort of the game that brought you there. But over time, it sort of seems like the balance between you having Pixels as a game and then this sort of idea of this sort of wider ecosystem network has obviously got stronger. And how does I guess from the example you're giving there, it's still a success if sort of Pixels is always like the core game that sort of dwindles away because there's some other big hit in your ecosystem. So in a sense, you're sort of, for, I don't know, Pixel token holders or whatever, not investment advice, but for Pixel token holders, it doesn't really matter what Pixels are doing if there's another big hit game in there. But how do you get that balance? Because I guess just for emotional reasons, Pixels was the game you've been working on for goodness knows how many years, and probably the one you think is probably still the best to some degree. So that's a sort of slight sort of shift for you.
I have to wear multiple hats as I'm building here, right? Like, my company is building out the core Pixels game, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, you can view me as a contributor to the Pixels ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
And as a contributor to the Pixels ecosystem, I have a duty to basically make sure that the Pixel ecosystem is in the best spot as possible too. So in my like CEO hat, the one that's like helping build out like core Pixels, I want that one to perform best. But in my like contributor role to the core or to the Pixel ecosystem, right? Like I have to make sure that Pixel is also performing healthy as well too. So to favor it is actually not like dutiful to the Pixel ecosystem. But that being said, it's very advantageous right now where we're at with core Pixels because we have that tight feedback loop between the two, and we have a good user base, a healthy user base still, and we can still do a ton of experimentations that we need to even help the rest of the ecosystem learn the things that they need to do. Also, if core Pixels isn't performing well in the short run, it's not going to be very attractive to other people to join the ecosystem either, right? So we kind of need to prove that some of the stuff that we're doing is working, that it makes sense to join the ecosystem, that the players in the ecosystem are good players to go out and incentivize and help acquire too. So core Pixels being stronger in the short to medium term and even the long term too really helps prove out the ecosystem. We have a really easy feedback loop where we can go and try things out in the core game, experiment quickly because we have like connections between both, right? And I mean, even in the core game team though, we're focusing on like multiple things at once too. Like we do have another app coming out in probably be like June or July.
Okay.
That's another like mobile first app centered around pets. It's kind of like a Tamagotchi-style game. It's meant to kind of target a completely different audience than core Pixels right now. Be mobile first, grow in a little bit different of a way. The gameplay is a bit more like fundamentally sound from the beginning on this one too. And yeah, that's going to be the idea. Basically, if we want these things to work, core Pixels performing well makes the rest of the ecosystem shine brighter. And at the same time, we still have to make sure that we're doing our like best service to as contributors to like the Pixel ecosystem separately too.
And presuming the sort of the vPIXELs as a token, the first implementation of Apptokens works well. How many more features sort of do you have in mind that would you start like going right? There's this thing in Apptokens, right? We can use that. There's this one. We can't use that one. But would you sort of be adding new sort of features in as you go along? It will become part of your sort of roadmap for Pixels and the ecosystem.
Yeah, with Apptokens, there's a lot to dig into. Like again, if you read the documents, you'll get bombarded with 1,000 different options on the things that you can do. It's very open, the possibilities, and there's still a lot to explore there too. I've always been of the opinion that like gradual decentralization is important because I think if you go too hard with some of these mechanics and then you have to change them early on, then it just is kind of wasted time to get them on chain. A good example is we're adding withdrawal taxes inside of the core game, right? Or actually, they're going to be called farmers' fees, not withdrawal taxes. But essentially, our system will work is when you go to withdraw tokens, you'll get two options. You'll be able to withdraw normal pixel and pay a farmer fee. It'll be pretty aggressive too. It'll be like 50% for the average user. And if you don't want to pay the fee, you'll be able to withdraw the vPIXEL and pay no fee, right? That particular mechanic we could have done off-chain, but Apptokens allow an on-chain way to do that too, right? Which is very, very helpful for partner tokens or partner ecosystem or partnered games in the ecosystem, right? So basically, we can use core Pixels to kind of experiment with the mechanics that we want off-chain first, and then bring those on-chain for partners second. Because that withdrawal fee, that's an on-chain mechanic that we can add with Tokenmaster and Apptokens, right? Like we did the off-chain at first, makes a ton of sense. Okay, Apptokens actually give us that functionality that we can do that on-chain. Now it works for all the partner games. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And there's a sort of a final question, which is, obviously no right answer, and I don't know even if it's a good question. But think, and I thought about sort of app tokens and maybe going back to your sort of spectrum. On one side you have sort of what we are now, which is there's no limits. You create a ERC20 token and people do whatever they want with it, and in certain situations, most of the time it sort of goes down and there's not a lot you can do about it. And then you have sort of on the other side you have sort of Web 2, which is obviously you control everything. So in terms of this sort of percentage of open sort of economies that we have, so 100% is 100% open is sort of where we are at the moment in most cases, and 0% is sort of Web 2. Where do you think, as someone who's running a game and trying to sort of implement these things, where do you think people should be starting out? What is 50% a good place to start? Should you be like just to start with 10% open because the whole thing can blow up so quickly? What have you learned so far on that sort of schema?
Yeah, it's funny. There's some criticism sometimes that we get even with our system right now, where it's like, that's not Web3. Who cares, to be honest? I care if things work or not, right? If it's not Web3, or if it is fully Web3, right, but it dies, why does that matter then, right? We reinvent the wheel a lot inside of Web3 when we don't need to be doing that also. Take, for example, what actual economy in the real world has a completely 100% open economy? What game in Web 2 or really any ecosystem has a 100% open economy? They probably don't, because there's reasons to have some rules on some things, right? This is actually an economics question, right? Like, how do you avoid tragedy of the commons? How do you avoid like negative externalities? Like, some regulations actually really helpful when you're building incentives. Like, the end goal for an ecosystem, right, should be to protect its people and its citizens, and to create rules that basically help achieve growth, right? So basically a set of users who are extractive and just selling the token immediately, that hurts the citizens of your ecosystem, right? And my goal as a contributor to the Pixel ecosystem is I want to protect the people who actually care about what we're doing and who are contributing in healthy ways, right? That should be like our mandate, basically. So closing some of the economy in some aspects to make sure that the people who care about what we're doing are protected the most is how I view it, right? I don't care if it's not Web3 enough or if it's too Web2. One, it's not. Like, there's so much unlocks that we've already given players. We've given out, I think if you do the math on the spot price, like over $100 million of rewards, probably more to our users over the last 14 months. It's crazy, right? And then they still try to say that it's not Web3 enough. At this point, I just don't care. We're going to do things that work, and we're trying to achieve sustainable play to earn, right? So there is an interesting thing inside of Web3 right now, where there is actually a class of users that have become a little entitled. And it's interesting because it's that same class of users that don't really have the interest long-term inside of Web3. There is an amazing group of Web3 enthusiasts who want to see this work, who understand what we're trying to build in the long term. Those are the users that you should be finding and rewarding, right? And those are the users that are, in the long term, going to be the ones that help actually make Web3 happen and become a thing in the real world, right? Web3 is still early enough where we're still in the experimentation phase, and we need users on the same team as these teams, right? So part of it is like smart rewards and smart targeting. Part of it is building experiences that Web 2 would also love. Like, the actual app experience still has some work to go in general Web 3, even though it's starting to get there. Like 5 years ago, it wasn't there. 3 years ago, it wasn't there. Now there's actually consumer quality apps that probably could attract Web 2 users if things are done right. And then you also need to build out the systems and the right economic systems that incentivize the right behavior too. And that's where app tokens can maybe come into play as well.
Yeah, very, very, very sensibly, you avoided putting a percentage on my answer, but that's fine. Thanks, Luke. A pleasure as ever.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And certainly we're looking forward to see how the new stuff goes live, which should be going live this week as this podcast comes out, and staking our pixels and seeing where we're going to stake those. So that'll be fun. Thanks to you guys for watching, listening to the podcast, however you are consuming it. And remember, every episode, we're talking to people who are struggling with some of the challenges and staying confident and enthusiastic and building out what we know is, I guess, inevitable for some products at least, if not all of them. So do subscribe, don't miss out, and we'll see you next time.